My approach is going to be similar to what we've seen so far. It's going to cover some of the similar ground, and yet it is going to approach these issues from a slightly different perspective. And I want to begin by sharing something that happened on August 6, 1914, when the German theologian and prominent church historian Adolf von Harnack offered at the request of Kaiser Wilhelm II the address to the German nation. And the speech climaxed with a rousing call to arms. Quote, "We will fight to the last breath of man and beast. We will win this battle even if we must fight against a world of enemies. Forward with God, who will be with us as he was with our fathers." Incidentally, Harnack's address came a mere 2 days after prominent German scholars, artists, and theologians publicized the Manifesto of the 93. And the document had a sizable influence in mobilizing societal support for military actions at the beginning of World War I. The noted theologian Karl Barth, who at the time was a young pastor in Safenwil, Switzerland, took umbrage at the Germans' Kriegstheologie, or war theology, promulgated by his former teachers. He charged that the ancient, quote, "the ancient storm god Wotan, or Odin, of the heathen Germans has been brought forth and has been made out to be the true God, close quote. God, in other words, had been turned into a pagan deity of our cause, our nation, our right claims, a deus ex machina, wheeled to the stage at will. It is not surprising if this historical anecdote strikes us as eerily familiar, and we have seen some of the reasons why. The challenges that current versions of Christian nationalism present are but a riff on a well-established millennia-old playbook. In my case, it brings back harrowing images of the war in the former Yugoslavia during the early 1990s. Internment camps, senseless mass killings, and on. And these atavistic forms of violence have permanently singed the lives of affected people. While it is too simplistic to say that religion was the principal instigator of those conflicts, it is undeniable that it fueled ethnic strife by sacralizing it. As the American philosopher Bob Dylan has it in his "With God on Our Side," religious legitimations go a long way towards the easing of moral conscience in the face of even the most reprehensible acts. Since the Balkan conflicts of the 1990s, we have seen an explosion of identitarian politics in the world. For Francis Fukuyama, the, quote, "demand for recognition of one's identity is a master concept that unifies much of what is going on in politics today." That is undoubtedly true of identitarianism, by which I simply denote a wide range of ethnocultural nativist movements across the globe. While not all identitarianisms are the same, they share this common pathos of disenchantment about unchecked globalization, loss of national identity, wealth inequality, betrayals of neoliberalism, multiculturalism, and so on. That is, they share a calamitous diagnosis, as someone has put it, and a radical critique of the current state of affairs. Along such lines, the French polemicist Renaud Camus forwards his theory of the Great Replacement, or counter-colonization, defined as a change of people and civilization via mass migration. And incidentally, Tucker Carlson over at Fox has caused quite a commotion in the last couple of weeks by peddling in this replacement theory language. Camus, when commenting on the Charlottesville rallies, affirmed the "we will not be replaced" chants while rejecting their anti-Semitic and violent aspects. He believes that, quote, "Americans have every good reason to be worried about their country being changed into just another poor, derelict, hyper-violent, and stupefied quarter of the global village," close quotes. Note how Camus' pamphleteering here, and I just had some brief excerpts from his work, amounts to a confabulating exercise, an exercise in storytelling about who we used to be and who we are becoming. And like other tracts in the genre, it kind of proffers this kind of Arcadian utopianism, this harping back for some past idyllic state when things were just right and uncorrupted, while decrying the dystopian present. The epistemological aspect, the truth aspect, the knowledge construction aspect of such storytelling was brought home to me recently as I read through Richard Evans's The Hitler Conspiracies. Evans notes, for instance, how the fakeness of the anti-Semitic canard, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, had already been established in the early 1920s, long before the Nazis arrived on the scene and turned it into a Holocaust charter. Of course, none of that mattered for those dead set on leveraging them for nefarious purposes. What was true then is true most of the time. Factual arguments rarely refute conspiracy theories and other entrenched mythological frameworks. Even if these theories were demonstrably untrue, they nonetheless expressed for the propagators an essential truth that in the end was not susceptible to empirical verification at all. Such a deeper truth is true even in the absence of evidence. Again, anyone acquainted with but a sliver of contemporary conspiracy theories and the post-truth ecosphere will find this all too familiar. Important as it is to attend to the political and sociological and psychological aspects of conspiracy theories, I instead wish to address here kind of an underlying issue in all of this, namely the nature of identitarian epistemologies. I will do so through a couple of these overlapping thesis statements, each of which requires some additional elaboration. And my principal concern is the problem of epistemic murk, and I'm using the word epistemic simply as that which relates to knowledge and construction of knowledge. So the problem of epistemic murk, which I define as settled foreclosures to truth, resulting from falsifying narratives, faulty cognitive processings and biases, moral and intellectual vices, affective orientations, so passions and interests, right? And intentional choices of groups and individuals. So let me just share a couple of these theses in the time that I have. First of all, identitarian ideologies, they always entail the production of what I call epistemic frameworks. So narratives, authorities, discourses, theories by which perceptual orientations towards the world are constructed. These frameworks or backgrounds are taken for granted conditions that make specific beliefs appealing in the first place. They comprise our feels of the world, our automatic takes on things, our tacit understandings, and commitments that amount to intuition, as Charles Taylor puts it. For instance, the great replacement theory that I just briefly mentioned amounts to such an epistemic framework. Second, epistemic frameworks are something different than mere worldviews. They are more fundamental, more primordial, and often operate on the level of the cognitive unconscious. They easily adapt to existing professed beliefs, at times changing them from the inside while retaining their external sheen. That is why people with seemingly different confessional allegiances can share in identical world orientations. 3, one expression of these automatic takes in identitarian contexts is a settled suspicion about mainstream and elitist sources of information, including the downplaying of experts. 4, identitarian ideologies and conspiracies have a complex relationship to facts. They routinely embrace an obscenely high standard of doubt toward facts that they don't want to believe, alongside complete credulity towards any facts that fit their agenda. that too contributes to the epistemic murk. 5, there's a two-way causality between epistemic frameworks, such as narratives of loss, and the affective quadrilateral, so of resentment, fear, mistrust, and grief. There are also other aversive effects that play a prominent role, such as feelings of disgust, quite important here. With that in mind, it is the intersection of moral psychology that deals with these moral emotions as they relate to our moral agency, moral actions. The relationship of that to epistemology is highly important for us to understand this phenomenon. 6, the fear aspect of identitarianism relates to threat perception. After all, as Ezra Klein put it recently, the simplest way to activate someone's identity is to threaten it, to tell them they don't deserve what they have, to make them consider that it might be taken away. The experience of losing status and being told your loss of status is part of society's march to justice is itself radicalizing. When that happens, ego defense invariably takes precedence over concerns for truth. Furthermore, identitarianisms operate on the merging of multiple identities into a mega identity, where when you activate one, you activate them all. And each time they're activated, they strengthen. Of course, this phenomenon holds across the political spectrum. And actually, I'm here at point 11 because I've been skipping some of them and I will make my paper available. So let me just follow the numbering that I have here. 11, the affective quadrilateral, therefore, fuels motivated reasoning, impervious to counterfactuals and the give and take of open dialogue. In fact, as numerous studies have shown, exposures to alternative facts but harden people in their positions. Such a baked-in foreclosure to corrections is the epitome of epistemic murk, always. 12, it goes without saying that willful not knowing is often implicated in acts and structures of violence. Henry Giroux speaks to this issue when he notes that, quote, we live at a moment in which ignorance appears to be one of the defining features of American political and cultural life. Ignorance has become a form of weaponized refusal to acknowledge the violence of the past and revels in a culture of media spectacles in which public concerns are translated into private obsessions, consumerism, and fatuous entertainment. As James Baldwin rightly warned, ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. Once embraced, these kind of things, these epistemic frameworks, right, they often function subliminally, and I could talk much about it, but I will leave it at that. Now, there are different sort of suggestions that I have. I think that any counter-epistemology, so any kind of attempt to address this, both on a conceptual level and a practical level, has to have a multi-layered approach. There has to be this sort of level of narrative epistemology, which I believe that Christian nationalism always amounts to a failure to reinscribe our identity into the story of Jesus. Right? I think that is one failure on that level. A second counter-epistemology will be a social epistemology, like recognizing the fact that I cannot arrive at knowledge on my own, that I depend on others, and that God has given spiritual gifts, and that these spiritual gifts, such as the gift of apostles, evangelists, and teachers, in themselves amount to a social epistemology, one that accentuates that our dependence on others and the Spirit is essential in the pursuit of truth. And I will also say that a kingdom counter epistemology will be a formative epistemology, right? Such an epistemology understands the human heart needs to be converted, right? As long as we are selfish, manipulative, and so on, we will remain beholden to the vagaries of epistemic murk. We cannot speak the truth unless we know the truth, writes Ellen White. And how often preconceived opinion, mental bias, imperfect knowledge, errors of judgment prevent a right understanding of matters with which we have to do. We cannot speak the truth unless our minds are continually guided by Him who is the truth. And my final point is that a counter-epistemology has to be an apocalyptic epistemology. I want to conclude with a quote here again by William Stringfellow, who sketches out the squalid and destructive tactics employed by the principalities and powers. He writes that these principalities and powers are manifested in denial of truth, doublespeak and overtalk, secrecy and boasting of expertise, exaggeration and deception, and the violence of Babel, such as verbal inflation, libel, rumor, euphemism, and coded phrases, rhetorical wantonness, redundancy, hyperbole, falsehood, and blasphemy. And as I said, I need to stop here, so let me simply conclude with an epigraph I actually have to my paper, which comes from Simone Weil, where she says that the need for truth is more sacred than any other need. And all I can say is, Lord, have mercy on your people. Thank you.